Welcome to this session on product safety for businesses selling online. This is the second part of a three-part series, and we're really excited to be here with you again. So hopefully you've seen the introduction session, and now we're on the second part, and then there'll also be a third part. So let me introduce myself very quickly. If you've seen the session before, you already know who I am and who Mark is, but we'll briefly introduce ourselves. So my name is Geraldine Kosh. I'm a product safety consultant, been working in product safety for 20 years. I work with trading standards on training the trading standards officers with risk assessment and product safety, also the technical author of PAS 7100, 7050 and 7055. I also work, as Mark does, as a technical expert for the CAST projects, which are the coordinated activity for the safety of products, specifically worked on injury data, crisis management and risk assessment. I also work as an expert witness in product safety, and I'm a CTSI lead officer for product safety. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Geraldine. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session on online product safety. My name's Mark Gardner. I've been involved in product regulation for over 35 years now, 28 years of which I spent working in as a trading standards officer. But for the last 8 years, I've been a consultant working with market surveillance authorities, governments, but also businesses. And my primary area of specialization within product safety is risk analysis and conformity assessment. And as Geraldine is, I'm also an expert witness in these areas. When I worked in trading standards, I chaired the European group, the Administrative Cooperation Group for electrical products, but also the National Product Safety Focus Group, Regional Product Safety Focus Group. I'm also a lead officer for CTSI, and I'm also heavily involved in the qualification of regulatory professionals through various roles within the qualification framework.
Okay, let's do a quick recap on the introduction session. So thank you so much for that, Mark, and introducing yourself. But very quickly, what we spoke about in the intro session, and if you haven't seen it or you didn't attend it, you can watch the recording if you go to the CTSI website, so the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, and you'll be able to watch that. Don't worry about watching it in a certain order. It's absolutely fine if you want to go back and watch that after this. So in that intro session, we looked at the basics of product safety, the legal obligations of economic operators, the importance of testing, and also on risk assessment and corrective action. In this part 2 session, we're going to be looking at proactive product safety management, discovering why safety requirements are needed and how to ensure you're compliant, and focus on the product safety management plan, which is in PAS 7050, known as a PSMP, and a product safety incident plan, which is in PAS 7100, known as a PSIP. Okay, so let's look at proactive product safety management. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Geraldine. Those of you who are familiar with product safety legislation and the raft of requirements which are generated in the EU, but also the UK, are probably thinking that it's incredibly complicated. And although there are some very, very highly technical and specific requirements for products, the whole of product safety legislation boils down to this slide. Design a safe product, verify that it's safe against whatever requirements that are set down in legislation, and then produce the same thing over and over again. So give yourself a very, very clear, very coherent, and very specific specification for the product, and then maintain that specification through whichever production control methodologies you use. And if you do that, and that's what the PAS 7050 standard actually decodes for you, if you do that, then in nearly all cases, you will be 90% of the way there to meeting your regulatory obligations. If you are not a manufacturer of a product and you're further downstream, you may still be taking responsibility for that product. You don't do this, but you need to make sure that it's happened. And in summary, safe by design, production control is what you need to establish. And what we talk about today is the means by which you actually do that. So the next slide, please. The fundamental legal obligation is that you only supply safe products. So supply is a legal construct around being, after it's been placed on the market or made available on the market. When it's within the market structure, when it's within the regulatory framework of Great Britain, that product must be safe. So you must have done those two stages, safe by design and production control, and this is the biggie, be able to demonstrate that you've done that through your documentary evidence. So it's not just a matter of saying, yes, I did that. That's all good. You've actually got to be able to demonstrate to the regulator that that's been done through the documentary evidence that you generate. And the reason for that is that we have what's known as a post-market regulatory system, where all of the responsibility is on the economic operators, however they are in the supply chain, and they have to undertake those activities. Otherwise, they cannot place their product on the market. So the legal presumption is that you've done this safe by design production control and you've evidenced that before you place your product on the market. So the real question is, what is safe? And safe it's not a binary judgment. There's quite often a lot of grey areas, but we do have a legal definition. And the legal definition is either no risk, and no risk is impossible because people can always do stuff that leads to harm. But there's no risk or only the minimum acceptable level of risk, taking into account the normal or reasonable foreseeable use of the product and the need to maintain what's known as the high level of protection for consumers. So what that means is tolerably safe. So what society, what legislators, what regulators determine is an acceptable level of risk is legal. But what is an unacceptable level of risk, and we'll come on and talk about this more in a moment, that is not legal. And you must not place products on the market or supply products which do not meet that minimum level. And what is safe, is determined by considering all the characteristics of the product, how it's presented to the consumer, the instructions, the warnings, and everything that comes with it, the effects that it can have on other products that it may be used with or likely to be used with, and the types of consumers that are at risk using it, especially children and the elderly. The legal framework takes account of vulnerability. And we've got the cute picture there of the small child who's clearly been painted by adults. And, because when you give children paints, they don't just, put little dabs of those on themselves. They get it all over the place. A foreseeable use for paints for children is not just that they will paint pictures with them. They will paint themselves. They will paint each other. They will get paint in their eyes, on their skin, in their mouths, up their nose. Is that foreseeable? Yes, because of the way that children behave. So does the product have to be safe in those circumstances, not just paint being applied to paper? Yes, it absolutely needs to be safe, taking into account that reasonably foreseeable use. So who has responsibility? Well, in short, everybody. If you're involved in the supply of goods to consumers, you're responsible for the safety of those goods that you supply. So anywhere in the supply chain, you take responsibility inwards and outwards. Now, other people do stuff further up the supply chain. You may either legally be required to verify that or may wish to verify that just for your own purposes. That requires some form of risk analysis, the risk involved in the businesses that you're dealing with, that you're buying products from. But the level of responsibility depends on whether you're involved in the actual manufacture, the production of the goods, or where you're affecting the safety properties of the product. So if you're the producer or manufacturer or importer, or merely involved downstream supply distributors. Distributors obviously don't have the same level of responsibility as the person who made it. But in legal terms, they still have to ensure that they're placing only safe products on the market.
Thank you, Mark. And everyone has a role to play, right? This is everyone's responsibility. It's not just one person, but that's really great for that introduction. Thank you so much. So let's look at, why do we care? Why safety requirements are needed and how to ensure that you're in compliance. So first of all, we're going to put in perspective the why. We're going to show you a short video from the Kids in Danger Toolkit, which I highly recommend you take a look at. If you search on the internet, Kids Endangered Toolkit, it takes about 4 hours to go through the toolkit, but it provides you with vital information and knowledge about product safety, and it's a free training session that you can do. Let's show you that video really quickly, which hopefully puts into perspective why we do what we do and why we want to keep consumers safe.
Professor taped him around him.
Trevor was only 8 months old when he was strangled by the restraints in a recall stop. Your instinct, Salvin.
Elliot nearly drowned when she flipped underwater. She was 8 months.
And hopefully that puts in perspective of why we do what we do. And the list goes on, as it says there. You know, those children are not the only ones, such unfortunate circumstances, but there's things that we can do better, and certainly do better in terms of design of products and safety of products for consumer protection. So highly recommend taking a look at that. So hopefully that's given you the perspective of why. Why do we do what we do? Why should we care? But just a few more examples we've got here from newspaper clippings. So Peloton, a child was killed in a tragic treadmill accident. Reebok Charm, Cot designer jailed there, Mike Tyson's daughter, and the Boxo blender. Now, we're not trying to highlight any particular companies here at all. We're just providing publicly available information. And I think Mark gave a really good point there earlier on about tolerability. And that's a really great concept that came in to the PRISM risk assessment methodology. And it talks about tolerability, because the risk of some of these things might be quite low, but it doesn't mean that it's okay. And it doesn't mean that it's tolerable if you can do something about it. So let's focus on that, and how can we be proactive in our product safety management? So if we look at OPSS, so the Office of Product Safety and Standards, if we look at their notifications on the product safety database from 2022 to 2023, we can see that one of the biggest concerns was electrical shock. And there is a really robust framework around electrical products. So we highly recommend you take a look at the legislation and the requirements that are applicable, but that's the minimum. You should then be looking at production control and manufacturing, as Mark's already highlighted. Chemicals is also a significant challenge with product safety, and there are requirements for that. Injuries is a generic term, and take a look at the product safety database and the OPS notifications, and you can find more. Choking, fire, burn. So we've got significant hazards here that we need to make sure are not there on the products that you're designing or that you're selling or distributing online. If we look at the EU Safety Gate, so on the European Commission's website, if we look at the overall EU, the top line there, toys are in the top 2. This has a lot of requirements around toys, right? There's a lot of standards that are available, a lot of guidance, but yet we still do see them in the top 3 categories here for 2023. Cosmetics is one of the most significant ones as well. And also that can relate to what they're targeting in that year as well. And because of that, there was a lot of projects on chemicals, and then chemicals and cosmetics that go well together. There was a few projects in those areas. So therefore they're top there. And if we're looking at Australia, we've got clothing, Belgium clothing, Bulgaria clothing. So some common patterns we can see with some products there. So it's worth taking a look at that information, because you can get really valuable insight into possibly priorities for you, if they're your product categories, or what you need to look at for the products that you're selling. And we don't want to be there. We don't want to be on the safety gate, right? The European Safety Gate or OPSS. So that's a risk we want to avoid for businesses. Financial costs can be significant. They can be huge. There's direct costs, there's indirect costs, there's reputation, there's replacing the products, and there's more. And it's important to note here that the new regulation that's come out, the GPSR, so regulation 2023/988, that's at the bottom of the slide, that's the new general product safety regulation in Europe. It notes within there that without prejudice to any other remedies, economic operators responsible for a recall may offer the consumer between at least 2 of the following remedies. So that's repair, replacement, and refund. So they have to actually do 2. So that's something for you to be aware of what your legal obligations might be, depending on where you're selling these products. Okay, so let's focus on the preparation of a product safety management plan and a product safety incident plan. So hopefully you'll remember a bit of quiz time. I know you're watching this on the recording. What PAS is in product safety, has the product safety management plan, and what PAS has the product safety incident plan. And I hope you're saying this aloud to yourself or with whoever you're watching this recording with, because the product safety management plan is in PAS 7050. So that's that overarching whole kind of proactive plan. What do we need to put in place? And then PAS 7100 is a small part of that. Well, it's not small, it's a significant part of it, but it's a part of PAS 7050. So 7100 focuses on corrective action, which can include recall, and they're both codes of practice there. But let's briefly introduce you. What is a PAS? Some of you may have heard of a PAS before, or maybe it's new to you. It's developed in response to an identified market need. And there certainly was, and I know Mark agrees with me, for PAS 7050, there certainly was a need, right? There was nothing like this out there. There is something like 7100, right, Mark, in Europe and in the US.
There are numerous documents on corrective actions, but PAS 7100, I think, is very, very specifically targeted at that kind of risk management level that we're talking about with both PASs. So yeah,
and PAS 7050 is that overarching. So these are really unique, great documents that we have here. So it's very often a request from a sponsor, and a huge thanks to OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards, who sponsored these PASs being available and for free. Not all PASs are for free, just to note that. So it is available for you to download for free. And it approaches an effective means to quickly introduce standardization. If you're in that retail space or, fast moving consumer goods, it's not quick in your world. But in the world of standardization, a PAS is quite quick how it gets developed. If you want to find out more, have a look at PAS 0 or PAS 0, which is on the slide here, and you can find out more about the specifics of what a PAS is. Just a few more slides just to clarify what PAS does. It's consensus. So we had quite a large group on PAS 7050 and also on 7100. We had a group of people that are part of the steering group, and they help write the document. And you have to get consensus, which is sometimes a challenge, but we got there with both of these PASs, and it's a huge wealth of knowledge, and we'll show you who they are in a moment. And it's a tool devised for the convenience of those who wish to use it. So if you want to use it, it's there for you to use it. If you don't use it, somebody might say, well, what did you do differently? But it's a really great document to have to help you put into prioritization and categorization what you need to do if you're bringing safe products to market, or if you need to take action when a product's found to be unsafe. So
it's worth noting that nothing in the PAS takes you beyond what your base level legal requirements. It is just a simplification, a decoding of those. So there's nothing additional in there. It's not saying do this over and above what you're required to do anyway. It's just a methodology you can use. So and that's why it was so needed in the market, because legal requirements are very, very complicated.
Really complicated, right? And interpretation is different with everybody. So you do get different types of PASs, even though a PAS stands for publicly available specification. They're not all specifications. So you do get a specification, which is a set of coherent absolute requirements. PAS 7055 on button and coin batteries is a specification. PAS 7100 and 7050 are codes of practice. So it's recommendations, it's guidance. Take from it what's relevant for you. Make it work in your business. Use the terminology that's relevant in your business. You can also get a guide, and you can also get a test method. So just wanted to highlight that really quickly. So let's look at the outline of PAS 7050, and we're going to focus on 7050 because that includes 7100. So you've got the part 1 and part 2. In both of them you have that. So part 1 is for businesses, part 2 is for regulators. Scope, normative references. Normative references is what other documents do I need while I'm reading this? So while you're reading 7050, you should have 7100 and vice versa. They're normative references. Terms, definitions, and abbreviated terms, which are useful to define some key terms. And then section 4 here is the product safety management plan. That's actually the same in 7100. Section 4 is the product safety incident plan. Then we have a specific section here in PAS 7050 for online marketplace operators. repairers and refurbishers, and distributors and importers of second-hand products, which fundamentally should have a plan in place that's relevant for them. So as mentioned, it was sponsored by OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards, so a huge thanks to them, and it provides a best practice guidance for both economic operators and market surveillance authorities. It's not a legal requirement. As I said, you might get asked, well, what are you doing differently? If you're not doing that, then what are you doing to make sure you bring your safe products to market? And then you've got two parts. The steering group here, we can see 29 members, huge wealth of knowledge and expertise from all of those members, all being in the room together and adding value to this PAS. So a huge thank you to the steering group on the PAS. So part 2 is for regulators. Do you want to go over this, Mark?
Yeah, the PAS, as does all the work that's being done by regulators and others in Great Britain in particular, recognises that legal compliance, control of risk in the market is a partnership. It's a partnership between regulators and between businesses. And therefore, regulators have got to be in a position to assist businesses in meeting these requirements, meeting these legal requirements. So regulators and recommendations for regulators, and again, they don't have to follow them, although, it broadly reflects what they do anyway, are included in the PAS. So, things like supporting businesses to develop their product safety management plan through legal advice, through specific advice in relation to products, through working with them to audit processes or things like that. So supporting businesses to implement as well as develop, and also things go wrong. Everybody recognizes that things go wrong. With the best will in the world, things can go wrong, and actually it talks about how regulators can respond proportionately where businesses fail to meet their legal obligations. Now, you'll note in this, it doesn't say fail to meet obligations set out in PAS 7050, because there are no specific obligations laid out in PAS 7050. It is not something that you have to do, but it's a methodology which allows you to do what you have to do. So it doesn't make specific reference to many legal obligations, but if you follow it, then you will have a good chance of meeting them. But regulators will only intervene where you are not meeting your legal obligations. And talking about regulators, we need to also mention something called primary authority. If you haven't got a primary authority partnership with either your local trading standards or environmental health or even one elsewhere in the country, it's worth looking into it, because that is a legal basis for the partnership working I've just been talking about. So it's a statutory system where businesses can receive what's known as assured advice from their primary authority. And that means that advice is then not just binding on that business, but binding on other regulators as well. So there are various different types of primary authority you can have, and various different regulators you can undertake primary authority partnerships with, but I would recommend that you look into that. And the 2 QR codes that are on this slide will take you to the relevant part of relevant pages of the Office of Product Safety and Standards website. But just to emphasize, if you have a primary authority partnership, you can receive assured but also tailored advice for complying with your legal obligations under environmental health, trading standards, or fire safety regulations. And that advice is not just for you, but it's also then for other regulators. I don't like checklists, so there's something I'm going to put out there. I don't like checklists. I think that they're sometimes an easy way of doing things, but quite often filling out checklists doesn't necessarily mean that risks are adequately managed. But the PAS 7050 does have checklists, but they're not your normal type of checklist where it says, have you got this document? Have you got this document? Tick in the box, tick in the box. Yes, I'm all done. Am I legally compliant as a result of that? Not sure. So Annex A to Annex E are methodological checklists where they talk about how do you manage this risk? How do you manage that risk? So I would recommend looking at those and applying them to your business. So we're talking about online marketplaces today. And so if you're an online marketplace, you'd look at checklist A and under Annex A, but also checklist C. And those checklists or methodological checklists are tailored specifically to the type of business you're in, and they're questions you ask yourself. And if you can answer those questions, then you're part of the way to managing your risk. If you can answer those questions fully, then you've got a basis on which to understand just how you're managing risk. And in addition to those checklists, those checklists are also available on the Business Companion as Word documents, so you can download them, adjust them, fill them out, do whatever you need to do with them. There's also Annex F on how to assemble technical documentation or to verify technical documentation if you're further downstream, and also how this relates to the statutory defence of due diligence in Annex G.
Thanks, Mark. So let's take a deep dive really into the sections of PAS 7050. So we want to highlight really quickly that in 7100, it starts with management commitment and then a review, and that is very similar to PAS 7050. Starts with management commitment and then we're looking at review, which is vital for both of these. So if you've been through a corrective action, it's vital that management are committed with you on that. And then also at the end, although you may want to forget about it and not talk about it again, it's really important to go back and review what worked well, what do we need to do differently? Do we have a product safety incident plan in place? If not, shall we make one? Shall we amend it, etc.? And that's the same with 7050. So these will be evolving documents. They're never going to be finalised and consistent. They will continually need updating depending on how your business works. So let's look at sections of PAS 7050. So we've got them outlined here. We've got management commitment first. You can see product safety management culture going down in each clause. We're going to have a look at each of these sections in a little bit of detail. So let's start with management commitment. We've just picked these companies kind of randomly, although we do know that they have been involved in incidents. A lot of companies get involved in product safety incidents. I think if you are in the business of selling products, you need to prepare that there may be an issue that comes up. This is just the side effect of doing business. It doesn't mean that you're a bad business. I think the way that you handle it or the way that you're committed to it is really, really key. So we've just picked some examples. Information is publicly available. How can management demonstrate their commitment for product safety? Watching this webinar is one way of doing it, perhaps. Attending a session and getting a certificate at the end of it, your CPD certificate. There's loads of free training. We'll talk about that in a moment. So we're not saying this is what you have to do. If you want to comply with, clause 4.2, you must put on your website your commitment to quality. We're not saying that. We're just saying here, let's take a look at some examples of what some businesses do. But it's going to be different for every single business. We just want to give you some inspiration on how some businesses do it, but you need to take it, interpret, and make it work for you. So if you go to these websites, you can see this information. And sometimes when you go into some of the stores, you can feel the commitment from management when you're walking around the stores. And that's important too. So culture and training. Culture is key. I've worked in some organisations where, I know we're seen as product safety police, or we're seen as, the fun police, or we're seen as sales prevention. That's not it at all. And I think if that is where the business is, then that speaks volumes of the culture. You need to be able to embrace within the organisation the technologist, the quality assurance specialist, the people that are dealing with product safety, because they are there to ensure the products stay on the market and that they're safe and that they don't come back. So it's vital for the business. We do know that sometimes it's a thankless task. So the culture is really, really important. What was interesting is that there was an article released by Catherine Niven and her colleagues in 2023 where they looked at navigating child product safety perspectives from experts in international challenges. And that's a really interesting article that's out there. And what they put in the article is that safety culture issues identified by participants included the apathy of some suppliers towards product safety, a deflection of safety responsibility to consumers, and misallocation of resources towards marketing and aesthetics over product safety, and a mindset that meeting the standard is an endpoint rather than the minimum requirement. And everything that's said there is vital for product safety. Sometimes the consumer does do something that is a little bit crazy or out there, and it might be something you can't do anything about. We get that, but it shouldn't automatically be your default thing. You need to investigate and figure out what's happened. And I've seen so many recall or corrective action notifications that are really boring, that are not very colourful. They don't have the same effort that's put into it as marketing would be of that product. And I think that's something to think about. And it's not once you've done your testing, oh, I have my toy, I've done my EN71 testing, everything's fine. That shouldn't be the end. That's almost the beginning. And that's the importance of what Mark was talking about in the slides at the beginning about your design. But then you also need to make sure that the conformity assessment, the processes, the manufacturing all supports the great work that you're doing at the beginning. So that's just a bit there about culture. And of course, training, that was noted within the article as well. They actually highlighted that there was an identification of skills gaps in the sector with little formal product safety education and training. So this was an international study that was done that said, for product safety professionals, and I know this for being in it for 20 years, we don't have any training from a business point of view. Trading Standards have a phenomenal training framework that I know that Mark's involved in. He's had that training. I haven't had that training, but I do support the training of product safety for training standards officers, and it's phenomenal what we have here. So we wanted to make something for businesses because we felt there was a huge gap. And it wasn't really fair. So the market surveillance officers are getting this robust training, but businesses don't have training. So we have developed Business Certificate of Competency in Product Safety. And cohort 3 is starting in May. I guess it depends when you watch this recording. There'll be more cohorts starting after that. But highly recommend taking a look at the website, the CTSI website, and looking at the Business Certificate of Competency in Product Safety if you want a more formal training on product safety. We highly recommend this. Okay, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Geraldine. You'll recall from what we've already talked about that regulation requires that you manage risk in relation to your products and the safety of your products. And PAS 7050 gives you a methodology to do that. And one of the things that you need to manage risk effectively is knowledge. So risk is all about understanding what's going on, understanding how people are using your products, what the law's saying, what normal consumer behavior looks like, what the market's doing. So PAS 7050 sets out ways in which you can basically take this wide view about everything that impacts upon the risk related to your product that you should take account of. So market surveillance is one of the names given to what regulators do. They look at the market as a whole, they find the areas of greatest risk or emergent risks, and then they intervene in those risks to reduce them. But you can do the same, and you should do the same, because actually the regulatory framework requires you to see what happens after you've sold the product, not just before. So, listen to consumer complaints, reviews. There's a legal obligation to report unsafe products within the single market now. There's a legal obligation to report products that you know are unsafe, even in GB. Understand what's going on with legislation and standards. Legislation is changing all the time because the market's changing all the time. Consumer behavior is changing all the time. So actually understanding what's happening in there. But for your specific products, you may be involved in standardization. But if you're not, standards change. They change to reflect market. They change to reflect what is an acceptable level of risk with products. But also, if you're buying products from third parties who maybe manufacture products for other people, or you even use raw materials or components that may be supplied to other people, keep an eye on recalls and alerts, because your product may be the same as somebody else's product which is being recalled, or it may include a component or an assembly which was included in somebody else's product that's been recalled, and that was the reason for the recall. So understand what's happening in the wider market. And finally, consumer behavior. Consumer behavior isn't always predictable. As a risk professional, I know that consumer behavior is different today to it was 20 years ago, to it was 40 years ago. And actually, the speed of change of consumer behavior has been speeded up by things like social media and and, you know, TikTok challenges and all those kind of things. So understand consumer behavior, because you may be able to prevent harm by adding warnings or things like that to your products if your product could be used in a particular way. Or if there's a TikTok challenge involving products like yours or similar to yours, and it's doing something that you certainly wouldn't recommend, but you've not already labeled on the product, you may want to get out there and actually warn people. Well, we don't recommend you do this with our product. It's a really bad idea. But it's not just about looking downstream, it's also about considering upstream. So, you know, considering everybody in the supply chain and how their activities impact upon your responsibility. So if you're high up in the supply chain, if you're a manufacturer, then, you know, be sure that, you know, your products are safe and that the inputs to that production system are safe, that they're verified against a specification, your raw materials are verified. If you're using other suppliers, always consider their brand and reputation as well as what they're telling you. You know, it's very easy to generate documents to say a product complies, but if it's a new supplier, then, you know, you've got to risk assess that beforehand. You know, I wouldn't go as far as to say sometimes people tell lies, but I think we all know that sometimes that is the case. So, you know, until you've verified that you can rely on certain things that other people are telling you, check it. Build that into your contracts, build it into your, you know, if you can audit what other people are doing. It's about verifying that the supply chain responsibilities are being taken seriously. So, you know, always go on reputation, go on track record. If they've got quality management systems, ask to see them. It's very easy to say, yes, I've got a quality management system. But if somebody says, well, can you tell me what that entails? Do you have, you know, a set of work instructions or documents supporting that? One of the big tests for any quality management system is what happens when things go wrong. And, you know, I know from experience of being a regulator, if I used to ask the question, what happens if things go wrong? And somebody said, well, they never go wrong. I mean, that's not necessarily untrue, but it did make me dig a little bit deeper, because things do go wrong. If somebody says, well, this went wrong and we identified it quickly and we took this action, we isolated this area of production, and then we made sure that production was back within spec afterwards for, you know, an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever, you know that you can have confidence in that, because the fact that when something goes wrong, it's picked up quickly and the appropriate action is taken is the true measure of a quality management system. You know, and you've always got to consider how critical is the supplier to the final product. You know, if it's a component part or raw material, is it safety critical or not? If it is the final product that they're supplying, then what confidence do you have in them? But always be aware of subcontracting. So a lot of manufacturers subcontract the actual making of products to other people. Now, if they subcontract to other people, then what's to stop those other people subcontracting to somebody else? So the quality management systems to assure production in the factory that was checked may not be being used for the product that's actually being made. And in my experience, the number of times where I would pick up a product and when I was a regulator, take it back to a business and they would say, that's not our product, it's different. What, it came through your supply chain, did it? And they check, and it was because somebody had subcontracted either a component part or some assembly or subassembly to somebody else, and it was no longer within control. So it's about either exercising that control or making sure that control is being exercised. So, risk assessment, and I have to be brief now. There are other training sessions on risk assessment, which will, you know, are either available now or will come later, depending on when you're watching this. But I will make a distinction between two different types of risk assessment. There is post-product risk assessment, when something has gone wrong, and that is what leads to the corrective action. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But there's also pre-market risk assessment. That's ensuring what we talked about before, safe by design. Safe by design is very well defined for some products where there are standards. Standards aren't legally binding in most cases, but they provide a methodology for designing a safe product. But you've got to ensure that your product is safe in all of the likely circumstances it's going to be used with all the likely users. So it's about compliance. It's about making sure the labeling is correct. Standards set out methods of labeling, but also regulations do as well. Many products require a safety assessment to be undertaken. So that's actually a design risk assessment. Toys, for example, require a toy safety assessment. If you're trading in the single market, you need to do a safety assessment for all products now. You've got to consider safe use, and you've got to consider documentary requirements. And on this slide is the available sessions for the PRISM risk assessment training that myself and Geraldine are doing. PRISM is the risk assessment methodology that's used when something has gone wrong. It's primarily designed for regulators, but it may be used by others. So next slide. So what is PRISM? Well, PRISM is a decision-making tool. It is not a means of predicting the future or determining exactly how people will behave or products will behave. It is a simplified decision-making tool within the chaotic environment of risk to decide, is this risk tolerable or is it not tolerable? And it follows a relatively simple process flow. You identify the product, then you carry out a triage. Triage for risk is very similar to triage in a hospital. Is it really serious and we've got to do it now? Or is it less serious and we wait for more time, or we wait for more information? But then the risk assessment process, which I'm not going to talk about at the moment, but as I say, there are other training sessions on that. That's the process of determining what is the potential for harm from the product? How serious is that harm? How does it happen? And how likely is that set of events where it will happen likely to occur? And the combination of all those things will lead to something called a risk label: serious, high, medium, low. And that will give you the first indication of what action needs to be taken. But there is this next stage that you have to undertake: is it acceptable or not? Can I live with it? And the bigger question is, whilst I could live with it, can everybody else live with it? So the considerations around risk evaluation are, would the media accept this? Would my customers accept this? Would consumers accept this? Would the political establishment accept this? So all of these things are considerations. And so the tolerability of risk is a complex construct, but it's one that we're all expert in. We all know what's acceptable risk and what's not in most cases. We look all the way, we go through every day and go, that's an acceptable risk, I'm going to take it. Or no, that's not an acceptable risk, I'm going to take some action to manage it. And so following the risk evaluation, you write everything down. You make sure that everything is documented because you subject it to scrutiny. You talk to other people. Everybody's got their own risk metric in their head, but actually discuss it. Your risk, you may be risk averse and therefore, take precautionary action over and above what everybody else thinks. Or you may be a risk taker and everybody else says, no, I couldn't live with that. And you maybe adjust it. So it's a group activity, and it's about documenting that rationale. Because if you don't take action on a risk, you determine it's tolerable, and then somebody asks the question, you've got the evidence to demonstrate, yes, I've got a rationale for that tolerability. But if it's not tolerable, you undertake risk management action. Risk management action is the means by which you take an intolerable risk and turn it into a tolerable one. So here's a diagram of the process flow. So the first judgment, the triage tool. The triage tool is no longer available as a Excel document, but the guidance on triage is still available to everybody. And it's that initial judgment we make. I mean, yes, there are parameters, there are metrics that you can use, but generally, we take a look at a product, myself and Geraldine as risk professionals, but everybody else takes a look at a product and goes, no, I don't like that. And that leads you to, well, we need to investigate it further. Or if it's a product hazard, which is common and everybody's lived with forever, and somebody's done something that's led to harm, then probably go, well, yeah, we're used to that. That's normal. We don't need to do anything about that. So here's a couple of slides on the process that I've already gone through. So, we have the risk assessment process, definition of product, etc. Then the evaluation, and the evaluation is the evaluation part is the bit that I really enjoy. It sounds like an extra stage if you're used to the EU risk assessment methodology. It's not, because we always interpret that result. We always go, can we live with it or not? then the quality assurance is new because it's not just about documenting the outcome, it's about documenting the process, because it's highly subjective risk assessment, but you are using it to make objective decisions. So that subjectivity has got to be clear. And when people have made estimations, made judgments, they've got to be open to challenge. And then the risk management, so you confirm the action is required, identify the nature of the action needed, and implement it, and then measure it afterwards. So when you're doing risk assessment, you quite often need data. And where are the data sets? And actually, there's lots of data out there. May not relate specifically to the risk assessment in hand, but it may give you some information that assists you in doing that. So product safety database here in the UK, but Scientific Advisory Group for emergencies, accident statistics, fire statistics. Fire statistics, if you're dealing with a fire risk assessment, the UK has the biggest set of fire data of any country in the world, as far as I understand it. Never seen any better set of data. You will need to interrogate that. You'll need to use that data in the way that for whatever risk assessment you're doing, but it's very extensive. And then mortality statistics, the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System in the US, again 300 hospitals, and all product related injuries are noted. That's not just unsafe products. People injure themselves with safe products as well. So you need to use that data set in a nuanced way. There's also product hazards that are deemed automatically serious risk and require action. And that's a legal presumption here in the UK. And there are different legal presumptions in the EU. But, in simple terms, any breach of chemical legislation, such as REACH or the chemical requirements under toy regulations, is automatically deemed serious risk. Personal protective equipment that is intended to protect against mortal harm, what's known as Category 3. If it doesn't meet the requirements, again, is serious risk. And chainsaw attachments that attach to angle grinders. What can go wrong? Those are automatically serious risk. That list is constantly being revisited. If you're interested in risk assessment, you've got to do or you think you may have to do one in the future, it's always good to prepare. It's always good to look at this stuff. It's always good to understand how they work. And there are multiple, here's one we prepared earlier, risk assessments that OPS and S have published on the website as well, and they're worth a look. So how does this change, or how is this varied from the EU methodology? Well, the actual methodology for determining risk is exactly the same. But there is additional tools within the PRISM methodology to help, and the fundamental thing, to help you make a decision. To help you make that decision, is it tolerable or not? So you've got to consider people at increased risk, how you use data, how you, you consider estimations of probabilities and things like that, testing and product homogeneity. You can't assume products are all the same if there's no evidence of that actually being the case. There's also consideration of something called relative risk, and the relative risk is what's the difference between a product which is considered to comply and this product in front of me that I'm risk assessing. Application of the precautionary principle, perception of risk, and psychological risk. I'm not going to go into those now because we have a separate training session on those. But other types of risk also require consideration, and the primary risk which has 70/50 is designed to address is the risk that occurs at design and production. And as I've already said, production is, if you design a safe product, you verify that's safe, but then don't clearly lay down that specification and communicate that specification and ensure that specification is what's made from the first product of production line to the last product, then what you're making is not what you verify. And there are multiple risks as to how that can go wrong, how something can change without it being intentional. If you don't have a clear enough specification, then something will change without there being any knowledge of that, because it's not actually a change in the specification, but it may be a change to the product safety. But you've got to consider changes by the supplier outside of the control of the business. Production line innovation, changes to design standards. Sometimes there's unauthorized changes to specification, particularly if you don't control the production process. changes to buyers and commodity prices for components. The geopolitical context is one that impacts on product safety. If there's scarcity of any particular raw material, then that can lead to an increase in price. If that increase in price will then make a product less sellable, then there may be a substitution, but that substitution may lead to the product no longer being as safe as it was designed to be and no longer tolerable risk. Subcontractor supplier changes, new machinery, production technologies, relocation, subcontracting, even manufacturing environmental conditions, particularly where you have things like glues. If it's too cold, too hot, too humid, the glue may not work in the same way that you intended it to. So all of these things require consideration. You need to assess the risk of variability. You've got to ensure, the law requires you to ensure that mass production is representative of the sample that's been approved, been tested, been verified. So identify critical control points. If it can go wrong, it will, and actually put in place risk management actions to ensure that, firstly, that you've reduced that risk of it going out of control to a minimum. But secondly, things still happen. If it does go out of control, that you identify it quickly, that you don't put products on the market where the production system was out of control. So you need policies and procedures in place to ensure the control of raw materials, component parts, inputs. You need documentation of production specification and risk-based process for checking everything that goes into that process, as well as the process itself and what comes out. And above all else, it needs to be traceable. So by traceability, we mean the ability to, if you pick up a product, to know which factory it was made in, when it was made, and what set of raw materials, components, what the process was to manufacture it. The reason for that is if something goes wrong, you can isolate, yes, it was made on this day and this happened. If you can't, and you make millions of products and there's no traceability control, then every product which was made in that production system will be held to suspicion because there's no evidence of when the problem occurred and when it stopped occurring. So one of the things that's always good to carry out, and PAS 7050 references PAS 7100 at this point in time. PAS 7100 is your crisis plan, your incident plan. Something's go wrong. How do we manage this? And one of the ways of testing your traceability control is within your product safety management plan is to implement your product safety incident plan for an imagined scenario. So you've got a product in front of you. What would happen if the regulator had come to us and said, this is unsafe? Can we trace it back to a production system, to a set of components, set of raw materials? If something had changed, would we know when, how, what the problem was? Would we be able to isolate the problem to a particular batch, or would it be, no, we've got no idea, so everything is now under suspicion? So that crisis simulation is a key to verifying that your management plan is working effectively. So product traceability is absolutely fundamental in the case of corrective action. And some of the biggest corrective actions have involved products where that traceability wasn't in place adequately, and therefore when something went wrong, nobody knew when it went wrong. So we're talking about traceability as if it's a nice to have. It is also a legal requirement. And it's something that if you haven't got good traceability, the regulators are likely to take issue with. If you are selling products into the single market, traceability has been strengthened by the new General Product Safety Regulation because it's key to effective risk management for both businesses, but also regulators. And if you don't have traceability, then products are automatically under suspicion. Here in Great Britain, the General Product Safety Regulations 2005, so they've been around 20 years, require that you have good product traceability. And if you haven't got it, then questions need to be asked. But also, you are taking a significant economic and reputational risk. So, in summary, you want to monitor everything. Knowledge is power. And so, monitor products performance in the marketplace. Where monitoring identifies a risk of harm, so listen to your consumers, you take corrective action. You implement your incident plan under 7100. And it's got to be emphasized, products don't just have to be safe at the point in time they're placed on the market. They have to be safe throughout their foreseeable lifetime. And you can't define that foreseeable lifetime and say, well, no, we recommend 5 years. 5 years, people throw it away after 5 years because not everybody will. Some people go, well, that's still working. I will use it until it stops working. So actually, one of the questions which you should ask yourself is, how does my product die? If it stops working, no longer works, you can't override whatever safety mechanism has kicked in, or it just stops functioning, fine. But if if your product dies in a blaze of sparks and fire and explosion, then that's a problem, because some people will use it until that point, even if you recommend a particular life cycle for it. So the incident plan. The incident plan is set out here, and I'm going to pass back to Geraldine to talk about this.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Mark. So where you identify a risk of harm, as it says there, you need to take corrective action. So that's where PAS 7100 comes in place. It's not just about recalls, it's corrective action. So what should we do? Now we've identified an issue, someone's alerted us to it, or maybe we've been alerted internally about that. Let's have a look at the product safety incident plan. So this is just the sections of that, and let's just look at a few of these really specifically. But it's important to be able to trace your customers, and if you're selling online, that might be easier than if you're selling in stores, but that's up to you to decide how you can do that, when you can do that, and of course thinking about consent, etc. So we'll look at these things really quickly. So the legal, the risk assessment, corrective action, decision plan, and communications plan. So customer traceability is vital. Can you contact them? They're not always going to give it back. It's important to note that, but you should contact them and say, alert them to the issue. And how are you going to do that? It's worth thinking about that up front, rather than waiting to when you're right in the middle and then you realize that you have to get permission from somebody who's not in that day or that week, they're on holiday. So thinking about that right up front. And then the legal notification plan is really important. Do you have legal advisors externally or internally that can help you with your legal obligations? Because there will be legal obligations. If you identify a serious risk, then you need to notify the regulator. And depending on the countries that you're in, there's going to be different legal obligations. So thinking about that up front, and there's more information in the PAS on that. Risk assessments we've done. We've spoke very briefly about it. I know Mark probably had to contain himself there because he could speak about it for hours. We both can. And we do. And we are doing a 4-hour session on this. We showed you the dates earlier, but don't worry, if you miss those dates, there will be a recording available that you can watch on that as well. We're probably rare. Maybe there's more people. Maybe when you're looking at this, you think you love risk assessment, then I think you're rare and you're like us. But you may not have that within your organisation. You know, if you ask somebody to complete a risk assessment, quite often that's a good way to empty a room, because not many people will stay behind and say, yes, I love it. Or maybe you do. I don't know. Depends on your business. But do you have somebody who's willing to go through the PRISM methodology or the EU methodology and have a look at how to do that assessment? Because if you don't have it internally, you might want to get someone externally to help you with that.
And one of the things that needs emphasizing is that the time to learn how to do a risk assessment is not when you're trying to manage a crisis because you've got 50 complaints about a particular product injuring people. That is not the time to learn how to do it. You know, if you have people internally who are going to do it, then they need to be familiar with that beforehand. But if not, you need to have that contingency plan. Who are we going to speak to? Who are we going to ask? Because the regulator will come to you with a risk assessment. And if you are a business, who wants to be in a position to challenge that or change that or influence that or even just contribute to it, then you need to know how to do this beforehand.
Yeah. And you need to have a corrective action decision plan. So how are you going to make decisions? Who's going to make decisions? Is there a nominated individual that is aware that they're going to make those decisions? Is it proportionate to the risk? How are you going to investigate? Have you ever put your factories or supply chain under pressure to do an FMEA, so a failure modes effect analysis? Tell me, how did this go wrong? We've had a customer complaint of XYZ. Can you tell us why this happened? It's so valuable to work in partnership with them. They know the product better than anyone else. They're developing it, they're designing it, possibly working with you and then actually manufacturing it. So they may be able to help you with that. And disposal is key. couriers don't want to take an unstable lithium-ion battery, rightly so, right? So how are you going to get rid of that if that's what you're selling? Are you selling electronic products? What happens if they fail? How are you going to get that back from customers? How are you going to then dispose of it? And there is no magic equation. There's no, if it's serious risk, you do X, Y, Z. If there's serious risk, you have a legal obligation, that's for sure. But if it's low risk or medium risk, does it mean you don't need to do anything? No. Probably the biggest corrective actions that have happened in history might be arguably low or medium risk, but they weren't tolerable. So there will be legal obligations, especially in the jurisdictions that you work in. So it's important to know that up front, because otherwise you can make mistakes which can cost you financially, directly from fines, but also with the time and resources that you're putting in place, rushing to do it after the fact. Communication is key. Miscommunication causes significant arguments, right? You have to be able to communicate clearly. Who have you got in your network that can help you with this? Who are the decision makers? Are they internal? Are they external? Do you need experts? If you're selling electronics, you'd hope that you know about electronics. If not, you might want to get somebody who is an expert that can help you either proactively or reactively. So where are you missing? Do that gap analysis. Are you working with regulators? Highly recommend that you set up primary authority if you haven't got one already. That doesn't work in all jurisdictions, but it's worth looking into. Supply chain partners, media, Q&A, communication channels. How can you get the message out really quickly? And then looking at safety throughout the product life cycle. So how long do you expect the product to last on the market? And is it safe for that? Have you done durability testing? Have you done life cycle testing, which is available for some products? And can it be repaired, recycled and disposed of? It's important to know that up front. And also looking at changing in legislation. I feel like the last few years, there's been so much new legislation that's come out. So keeping up to date, if you feel overwhelmed or you can't do it, then get somebody external to help you with that. And the Business Companion, the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, is a really vital resource. The OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards, is an amazing resource as well, their website. And have a looking at PAS 7050, and there's some really useful links in there in resources that you can go to for this information. And then the last section, so 5, 6 and 7 for online marketplace operators, repairers and refurbishers and distributors and importers of second-hand products. Fundamentally, they should have a product safety management plan in place. That should look like what's relevant for your business. So what is the risk appetite of your business? What's the culture, etc.? That is going to reflect what your product safety management plan looks like. If you're struggling where to start, go to the annexes. This is available on the Business Companion, on the Chartered Trading Standards Institute website. You can download the annexes for PAS 7050. So these ones, these are PAS 7100, sorry, the 7050, you can download those in a Word editable format and look at those checklists. If you are a manufacturer, then you should be looking at B and A. If you're an online marketplace, then it's C and A, but A is applicable for all. And then as Mark already explained, you've got Annex F and G. 7100 also has a few informative annexes that are really useful to look at and some similar documents to PAS 7050. So we hope you enjoyed the session. We hope you have a wonderful day or evening or morning or wherever you are. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Chartered Trading Standards Institute.
Thank you.